Hey guys, while I'm waiting for the footage for the next Real versus Real to be uploaded to my computer so I can start editing it, which is going to take several hours, I decided to do a vlog because it's been a while since I've done one. I have been meaning to do another one, but I really haven't found the time. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about ParaNorman. Now, I will probably talk about other stuff too, but this vlog is mainly about ParaNorman because I have more stuff to say on it, and I wanted to keep totally spoiler free for the review. So know now there probably will be spoilers in this vlog. I don't know that I'm going to get too much into like the big twist in the movie, but this really is the kind of movie that it's best to go into it completely oblivious of what's going to happen beyond the trailer. It's really a good movie to go into knowing pretty much nothing. So if you haven't seen this movie, turn off this vlog and go and see the movie. So just starting off, this year has been a amazingly this year has shown a lot of promise when it comes to animated films. I could not have picked a better year to start doing this because the amount of potential going into this year was, I really can't imagine how there could have been more potential going into this year. Because not only do we have Pixar finally doing a film that's not a sequel, and DreamWorks doing a film that's not a sequel, and Disney's getting better again finally by themselves, and Aardman was releasing a film this year, and Tim Burton is releasing a film for the first time since Corpse Bride, Like in Focus since 2009's Coraline. They're really, and Studio Ghibli had their a film released, or technically it was released last year, but the translation was released this year. It's hard to imagine how there could have been more potential going into this year, which I've been really lucky. Like, not only has there been potential for some really good movies, but there really hasn't been a lot of horrendously bad movies. Because even the films that starting out that I didn't like The Lorax and Madagascar 3, were not terrible. Like, they were competent films. Now, Ice Age 4 was pretty awful. That's probably the first film I've seen that's just typical bad sequel. But for the most part, I've really not had to go and see really terrible movies. And even if I just started last year, I mean, there were some good films that came out last year, but there were some really terrible films that came out last year too. And I think it was a more largely average year in terms of films, whereas this year almost every film that has come out and still has to come out has the potential to be really, really good. So going into this, a lot of times whenever the idea is that, well, Pixar is probably going to be on top, except for last year. I don't know if anyone was really expecting them to be on top last year, even before the film came out. But that's what you expect. And maybe DreamWorks will come close with something, but for the most part, they're going to be the front runners. Going into this year, even from the start, there was a lot of potential for anyone could have been like, any film could have been like the best movie, or could have dethroned Pixar as the best film. Now, having said that, and seeing about half of the films that have come out so far, there's 4 more animated films coming out this year. Having seen about half of them, probably more than half, although I don't know if I would count Secret World of Arietti. I certainly wouldn't count the Beauty and the Beast in 3D, or Finding Nemo in 3D whenever that's coming out. Having seen a little bit more than half of the films, I found that even though the potential this year has been like incredible, none of the films quite came up to the level that I was expecting of them. And that goes even for Studio Ghibli, where the things about the 3 films that I was really expecting a lot of was The Secret World of Arietti, which did turn out to be quite good. Like, I would consider it a fairly probably I'd put it higher up than stuff like Brave and the Pirates, because those are the other two films. Would be Brave and the Pirates. I was really expecting a lot from those. Secret World of Arietti was simplistic. It wasn't the best thing Studio Ghibli came out with, but it really does. It's the kind of movie that you appreciate for what it was after you let it sink in for a day or so. So I'd say that was a pretty terrific film. I still don't know whether I would consider it an actual film for this year, just because it did technically come out last year. Brave and the Pirates were good. Like, they're movies that I liked. I genuinely liked those films. They didn't come up to the standards that I expected from those two studios. And I'd say that of both movies. In different ways. Like the Pirates, it had the quirkiness, it had the characters, it had the setting. It felt a little bit... It felt like it sort of could have been a little bit, had a tighter story. I think that was my biggest problem with the Pirates, was it didn't feel like the story was very well organized. With Brave, there were two reasons why Brave wasn't as good as I think a lot of people expected it to be. One was the story was not as unique as Pixar usually has, which is, as I've already stated, for the most part their stories are very unique, very different, even for films like Cars, which I really don't think Cars is that bad. I know a lot of people think that I hate that movie. I don't hate that movie. I don't think it's a bad movie. It's not great. It's one of those films where I don't mind watching it, but it's not like, it doesn't have the emotional depth of some of the other films, and the characters are really cliche. Like, they're not very interesting. But there was some good, some good characters too. But like the main character and Mater, they're not very good characters. Apart from Cars and Cars 2, their films have, Cars and Cars 2, despite the fact that they're not as good as some of the other movies, they're all very unique. Like, you're not going to see many films like that. Brave was a little bit more standard in terms of the plot, even though there was some differences. Like, and I guess I can spoil it now, that movie's been out for a while if you haven't seen it, which you still should have. The mother turning into the bear, that's not completely standard. The relationship between the mother and Merida was quite well handled. You don't usually see that level of sophistication in those kind of relationships in films like that. So there were some things that were a little different, but for the most part the story was a very standard story. Apart from that, the other big thing, and possibly the thing that really hurt the film, was it didn't take any risks at all. And that is not normal for Pixar. It's normally they take a lot of risks. And some people would say almost some of the risks don't pay off as much. Because I know there are some people who don't like the fact that some of their films have real dark moments, or are really just like Up and Finding Nemo start off with some really tragic scenes. But the thing about taking those risks is, first of all, they set the standard for the entire film. The film wouldn't be near as meaningful throughout if you didn't have that starting moment, and it sets them apart. Like, these are things you remember, and that's important in films. Unless you want your films to be completely forgotten, you have to take risks so that people will remember the films for that. Brave did not really take any risks. And that was one of the reasons why it didn't quite it didn't catch your attention as much as some of Pixar's films usually do. Um, ParaNorman takes risks. Like, that, of all the films that I expected to wow me this year, ParaNorman probably wasn't one of them. And I don't say that like I was expecting it to be a bad movie. I was not expecting it to be a bad movie. I've sort of saw ParaNorman and Frankenweenie as being sort of the same, it's probably in the same quality range. Because as much as I love Tim Burton, he has not really. The last film that I really loved by him, and I really, really loved it, like it's probably my favorite movie, animated or non-animated, and I highly doubt that many people would guess what it was just by saying that. It was actually Big Fish. I love that movie. I am a sucker for Big Fish. That's the last film I've seen from him that I really, really thought was good. And it's actually one of his less popular films, but it's not that I haven't enjoyed some of the films since then. It's just that none of them have quite come up to the quality of the films that I used to enjoy from him. Because, like, I love Edward Scissorhands, I love Beetlejuice, I love Nightmare Before Christmas. It's weird as hell, but I always liked James and the Giant Peach. There are others too. I mean, I love Tim Burton films. I have not been impressed by him lately at all. It really does seem like he sort of lost. Like, even if they still have that imagination, they still have the gothic feel. They're still gorgeous to look at. They're still fun, but it seems like they really lost like the heart and soul that the old films from Tim Burton had. So what I was expecting from both, and ParaNorman sort of struck me as it would probably sort of be the same kind of film. I still see Frankenweenie as that, and I really am hoping that it proves me wrong, because I love Tim Burton. I really want to like that movie. But I saw ParaNorman as, one thing I'm like determined to do during this vlog is I do not want to talk about Coraline. I do not want to talk about Coraline because I know I'm going to do a review probably within the next couple of months comparing Coraline to something. Probably to ParaNorman. Maybe to Nightmare Before Christmas. It sort of depends. I kind of want to compare it to ParaNorman. So originally I was going to do it for Halloween. I doubt ParaNorman will be out by then. Maybe they'll try to make a Halloween release. If they do, it'll be great, because I really wanted to do Coraline for Halloween. And originally I did want to compare it to Nightmare Before Christmas. That was before I saw ParaNorman. It would make a great comparison to Coraline. I'm thinking even if it doesn't come out for Halloween, I may just hold off and do Coraline later and find something else for a Halloween release. Maybe I've had a couple people ask me to do Scooby-Doo stuff. Maybe I'll do that. Or maybe I'll review Monster House. Or maybe I'll do a couple of things. But I do not want to talk about Coraline. I do not want to give my opinion on Coraline. I do not want to talk about Coraline. The one thing I'll say is, because that was their last film, I expected Leica in Focus to come up with something competent. I was expecting for ParaNorman to not be bad. The thing was that I also knew that Coraline, one of the reasons why it was so imaginative was because it was based on a story by Neil Gaiman, and he's a very imaginative writer. So I was thinking, it was a gorgeous film. Of course it was imaginative. It's based on this incredibly imaginative book. ParaNorman's not. And they've only done, the only thing that they've really done is Coraline. I know that Focus did 9, and that's not a point in its favor, because as good as that film looked, it wasn't much other than spectacle. So I was holding out hope that ParaNorman would be entertaining and creative. I didn't know, it was sort of basically, are they going to continue to do good stuff and continue to like improve, and are we going to see them make stuff that's as good as previous releases? I'm talking about Coraline. Are they going to do stuff that comes up to the quality that's kind of being expected from them? Or are they going to be like the studio that had the one film that was really critically successful, and then their next films aren't going to be as good? So what I was expecting from ParaNorman is I was expecting it to be a competent film, to be entertaining, and to be good looking. I was worried that it would have 3D spectacle, and I was worried that it would not be. It didn't look very creative. It was a zombie movie. Everything has zombies in it. Everything has zombies in it. So it was not one of the films that I expected, especially after seeing Brave and seeing the Pirates. I was expecting that the films that would possibly dethrone, which after seeing Brave and the Pirates, I was pretty sure that they weren't going to be the best films this year. Hoping that they weren't going to be the best films this year, actually. I was expecting if anyone was going to do it, it would probably be Rise of the Guardians. Just because, in Wreck-It Ralph, I think that looks like fun. It looks like a freaking fun film. But Rise of the Guardians looks like it has the potential to be a little bit more in the range of How to Train Your Dragon rather than some of DreamWorks' other stuff. So I was expecting it to be Rise of the Guardians and possibly Wreck-It Ralph. Those were the two films, and I think a lot of people were expecting a lot from those two films. I was not expecting it from ParaNorman, because ParaNorman is thus far the best animated film I've seen, and it is good enough so that Rise of the Guardians has to be at least as good as How to Train Your Dragon, and Wreck-It Ralph has to be, to continue the improving as the Disney films have sort of, it has to be at least as good. It has to be better, actually. Wreck-It Ralph has to be better than the animated Disney films that have come out so far. It has to be a step up from what they've done in the last couple of years. At least in order to be ParaNorman in my eyes. Because it takes those risks and it pays off. And some people will say, some people probably don't like some of the risks that it took. In my opinion, it really pays off. It really is not at all what I expected from this movie. In the best possible way. Like, in a little backstory, and one of the reasons why I decided to do this vlog is I actually did see the movie again last week in 3D with people. I went with my mom and my sister. The first day that I saw this on the day that it came out, and I was supposed to work that day, and I was getting off at 10, and I was going to see the movie in 3D at 11:30. My boss called me the day before and asked me if I could stay in for another 4 hours, so I wound up staying at work until 2. And while I was at work, I found a showing for 3 o'clock and decided, regardless of what happens today, I'm going to see this movie, even if I can't see it in 3D. So I decided to go for the 3 o'clock version, and my boss wound up being late, and when he did show up, he informed me that he could not afford to pay me anymore. So I basically got fired right before seeing this movie, and not even kidding. The good thing is I'm going to have some free time until I can find another job to do these reviews. Now, after I was informed that he couldn't afford to pay me anymore, and I am their only employee, so I'm guessing that the place that I worked is not going to be in business for much longer. I decided that I was still going to go and see ParaNorman. It had better be good. And I really think that if this film had just been merely okay, I probably would have been exceptionally hard on it that day. Um, but as it turned out, coming out of this film, I was in a great mood. And it's like, it's not because the movie is overly happy or overly cheerful. It's not. It's actually kind of sorrowful, at times heartbreaking, but it was not just the first animated film, the first film this year that I got really excited about after having seen it. Like, I was ecstatic. I could not have been more pleased at how the film turned out. So, so I was in a great mood despite having been fired. Funnily enough, the week before, the same thing had happened to my sister for slightly different reasons, as she got let go from her job. So, both of us have had a lot more time to spend with each other. So she came along with me and my mom to go and see ParaNorman again this last week. Actually, one of two movies we saw together. The other was The Campaign, which is stupid as hell, but also fairly hilarious. My sister is not nearly as interested in animated films as I am. It's not that she doesn't like them, but she is a fan. When it comes to animation, she likes Studio Ghibli, she likes Pixar, she likes stuff like Cowboy Bebop. She was the one who showed me Trippets of Belleville. She likes what most people would consider to be the top of the line animated films. Which is not to say that she doesn't like other stuff, but for the most part, like, she wouldn't be the one to come to me and show me an animated film. Like, I showed her How to Train Your Dragon. She liked that. She even liked Despicable Me. Recently, Tangled. She watched that with me when we did the Real versus Real. Thought that was cute. Arthur Christmas. We went and saw that. But she is not nearly as dedicated or as interested in animation as I am. And it makes sense because I went to school for illustration and concept art and love the artistry of animation. And not just like that. When we were kids, it was the same way. I was always way more interested in animation than she was. She went to school for photography, so she's not as captivated by animation as I am, and she doesn't become as invested in animated films, I think. In some, yes, like Studio Ghibli films and Pixar films, but she would have no interest in seeing something like The Pirates at all. She did want to see Brave, although never got around to it. So with this one, basically all she knew going into it, and I doubt either my mom or my sister knew anything more than this, was that it was animated, and that it was from the same studios that made Coraline. Both of them have seen Coraline. My sister had seen Coraline. And again, I am not giving my opinion on Coraline at all. So, not at all. But, so this is my sister's opinion. This is not my opinion. Coming out of the theater after ParaNorman, my sister said, she looked at me and said, that was from the same makers as Coraline? And I said, yeah, that was from the same makers of Coraline. And she said, I'm surprised. I did not think Coraline was that good. Which I'm not gonna tell you what I said to her, but how she backed that up was she said, there were really good things in Coraline. Yeah, I thought that there were really good things in Coraline, but that movie didn't feel whole. It didn't quite feel like a whole movie. She said, this film felt like a whole movie. And I guess what she meant from that was that it felt like everything was basically tightly constrained and executed properly, I guess. That Coraline to her felt like good moments strewn throughout a plot that was maybe not as well constrained. And what she said after that, and this is something I probably wouldn't say just because I do consider animation to be, the potential for animation to be as captivating as any live action film. What she said was that ParaNorman was movie good. That it wasn't just good for animation, it was good for it could be held up against basically any animated film or live action film and still be seen as a good movie. And I think in a lot of ways it's probably fair to say that, just because when you look at a lot of animation, it really does, the standards aren't as high as they could be. You get some really good animated movies, but more than likely you get fairly standard animated movies, and a lot of animated films don't really take themselves seriously. And to a degree, that's fine. I mean, not every movie, like live action films don't really, a lot of live action films don't take themselves seriously either. But every year you get hundreds of live action films, and just like 10 to 13 animated films. So it's more obvious with animation that you don't get a lot of those films that really take themselves and their stories and their characters seriously. And I guess that's one of the reasons why I'm not, alright, hold on, my battery's going out, I'll be back in a sec.
Alright, sorry about that.
What was I talking about? Animated films taking themselves seriously. Okay, so, example, Madagascar 3. Yeah, surprisingly high scores, and I know a lot of people liked that movie. Now, I'm not saying it's not entertaining, and saying that a film like that's not taking itself seriously is probably a little bit, it's really not making much of a point, because obviously that film wasn't trying to take itself seriously. But at the same time, well, like I just mentioned, me and my sister went and saw The Campaign. There's no way in hell that that movie was trying to take itself seriously. But it had a plot. Like, it had a build-up. It was working towards something. It was stupid as hell. And the characters were stupid as hell. But it was funny. It was not trying to take itself seriously. With Madagascar 3, it almost seemed like the film was trying to distract you from noticing that it was trying to distract you with constant changing plots and constant changing scenes and constant climactic moments, and never really built on anything, which I'm not saying that you shouldn't be entertained by something like that, or you shouldn't enjoy it. I can't say it's a good movie. It wasn't. I probably gave it a higher score than I should have, but it was entertaining. I can't call it a competent film. Yeah, it's a competent film. I can't really call it a good film. With ParaNorman, first of all, a lot of people thought that it started really slow. Now let's start first. Some things about ParaNorman that really didn't work, because it's not a perfect movie. I would give it a solid 9. Like, I wouldn't give it lower than a 9. I wouldn't give it higher than a 9, but I would give it a solid 9. There were some things that didn't work with ParaNorman. It did not have a wildly funny sense of humor. Um, like, it had funny moments. A lot of the jokes were sort of came off as kind of corny. They kind of felt flat a little bit. Which is the same. I guess it doesn't hurt to talk about Coraline in that way. Coraline was the same way. I mean, it wasn't a wildly funny movie either. Half of the jokes were sort of like when Spink and Forcible, I think there was the retired showgirls, were talking about like the oolong tea and saltwater taffy. It was just sort of like, I don't get it. There were a lot of jokes in that movie like that. There were jokes like that in this movie. It's alright, just because I don't think either film was really trying to be a comedy. A lot of the humor that was there, it was a little bit more quiet. It was a little more character derived. Like, you get more humor from just the wackiness of the characters than anything. Other than that, some of the characters in ParaNorman were a little bit cliche. Like, I loved Norman. He was the best character in that movie, which is how it should be, obviously, because you're spending most of the time with him. He was fine. I liked his characters. Some of the other characters were a little bit stereotypical. His older sister was. Neil kind of was. He wasn't bad. He was kind of funny, but he kind of was Alvin, the bully. He was pretty stereotypical, although also pretty funny. Mitch kind of was, although maybe not so much considering the last scene with him. But they had some fairly stereotypical characters. They weren't bad. They just weren't quite as interesting as they could have been, I guess. There wasn't an exceptional amount of depth there. Like, there was, like, if you have, like, Norman up here where he has, like, this really great character development, and most of the other characters are sort of, like, down here where they're not nearly as well developed, I guess. But it's sort of like the flaws in ParaNorman, it's made up for the fact that it really does tell the story well. Like, a lot of people thought that it started off really slow, but if you watch it again, because the last 30 minutes especially go in a completely different direction from what you expect, the first part of the film makes sense. Like, if you take it as a whole, suddenly the film is obviously working towards something, and that's admirable. Like, the pacing in this movie, a lot of people think of the pacing as really sort of off. I was fairly impressed with the pacing in this movie, because the things that it establishes in, like, the first 30 minutes, where it really is just introducing you to the town, and the main character and some of the backstory, it's necessary for when you get to that part towards the ending, to look back and think, oh yeah, well, you kind of needed that moment to get this moment. And there are some nice things thrown in that sort of hint at what's actually going to happen. Like, if you look back, there are quite a few nice little touches that indicate what the film is ultimately trying to get across. It knows what it wants to be, which is, for a film to be successful, it needs to know what story it wants to tell. And this film knows what kind of story it wants to tell. And this is the point where we really get into spoilers. So again, if you haven't seen this movie, just stop watching right now and go and see it. Um, Going into it, you expect it to be about zombies. That's what it's advertised as. It's advertised, basically what you expect from this movie is you expect the story to go that there's the outcast, the typical outcast character that no one really likes and no one understands, and then the zombies happen, this thing that only he can accomplish, and he's gonna save the town, and he's gonna be a hero, and everyone learns their lesson. That's what you're expecting from the film. Now, to a degree, that's kind of how it is, kind of, but it's goes to places that you really don't expect, and it's not so much because it does have the outcasts, don't judge people type thing, but it does it in a way that animated films and films that you might market towards kids especially don't do. First of all, it's not about zombies. It's really not. Ultimately, the movie is about bullying and the consequences, especially. Not only it's not good to bully people, but what happens when you bully someone to a certain point, the consequences that kind of thing can have, and how people, why people, not just bullying too, it's also like mob rule, and how people, just discrimination in general towards people who are different, and what kind of consequences that sort of discrimination can have. And the idea behind it is that the zombies, and I'm warning you now, I'm probably going to spoil the whole thing, so seriously, if you haven't seen this movie, I'm not kidding, go and see it, it's amazing. Infinitely better if you don't know what's going to happen. I'm just going to sit here for a second. So, and go, leave. Okay. You expect it to be about zombies. That's how it's advertised. The town itself, Blythe Hollow, is basically a dying tourist trade, because 300 years ago they put a witch to death. They hung her. And there's this legend of the witch's curse, which, of course, no one thinks is real. It's been 300 years. That every year on the anniversary of the witch's death, she brings back the dead, specifically the 7 people in the town who condemned her to death. And those are the zombies, are the 7 guys. The curse is real, and the reason that it hasn't happened every year is because someone who can talk to dead people, which is where Norman comes in, and previously his uncle, and I guess if you have seen the movie, then you really don't need this explained to you, but whatever. I know some people who haven't seen the movie are still going to watch. You were warned. Basically read from a book and keep the witch's curse from happening. So what you expect is for when the zombies to come out, it to be a fun, quirky zombie flick where this kid that's constantly picked on saves the day and is a big hero. What happens is, first of all, I started to see that this story was turning into something else fairly shortly after the zombies showed up. At the point where they started heading down into the town. And the reason is after they get into the town, you see how they're sort of they huddle together because they see all of the stuff from this century, and they're all freaked out. And then the crowd, who starts out really freaked out, sort of turns and then decides to start attacking them and getting their shotguns, and you see a little girl pull off one of the arms and laughing and stuff. And at that point, I was sort of starting to like get this sort of like, okay, this may be going in a different direction than I expected. This is interesting. So by that point, and looking back to some of the earlier on in the film, I was thinking, okay, so this is going a little bit different. And I was already expecting that it's possible that the witch is not a witch. I was not expecting, when they got to that scene where they finally showed the witch, I was not expecting it to go like that. And really, I was not expecting it to be a child. Like, I was not, that was, by that point, I was sort of starting to see that they really were like the mob, with the angry mob, and how they were attacking the town hall with the main character still inside it. You could see that they were going for some sort of social commentary. You could see that it was like a mob rule, what people do when they're afraid. And it had been previously established in the movie. Norman's grandmother, her line of, it's alright to be afraid as long as it doesn't change who you are. Stuff like that. You could tell that they were going for something like that. I was not expecting for the witch to have been a small child. When I saw that, I think I was sort of like, oh, just like, oh, you gotta be kidding. Because you don't expect an animated film to go there. You really do. You don't expect it. You don't expect an animated film to go there. You just don't. Like, implying that an 11-year-old girl was hung, that you don't expect it to go there. And I'm kind of surprised I haven't heard more outrage over it. Because, and I'm not saying that, like, negatively, because the film, it goes there because, and it's effective. Like, the ending scene especially is heartbreaking. Like, because after Norman finds out about it, he decides that rather than trying to do what everyone has always done, which is reading from the book, which early on it's established it's a storybook, it's a bedtime story. So again, you can tell, if you think about some of the previous parts in the film, it adds up, which is what a good film does. If it's building up to a twist like this, you want to look back and see how it adds up. There are plenty of scenes that add up to this twist. He decides to go and talk to her, and it's just like, well, I cried. My mom and sister cried. My sister very rarely cries for animated films. She cried. It's a sort of forlorn, heartbreaking, genuinely sad scene. Beautifully done. Like, one of the things, and again, I'm talking about Coraline, but yeah, whatever. I'm banking on the fact that not many people are going to watch this, not the same people that when I actually do the actual review, is one of the things that Coraline did really, really well was, apart from the visuals, was the soundtrack, like the score. I was infinitely impressed with the score in Coraline. The score in ParaNorman is a little bit more understated, but going back, and I don't think I noticed it as much the first time as I did the second, and the last scene where you first see Agatha, that's the witch's name, Agatha in the witch form, which is actually fairly, not only impressive, like that scene is the most like what Coraline sort of looked like visually, is that scene is kind of creepy in that state. The music there and the music after that, where the scene calms down and she goes back to being Agatha, is beautiful, perfect. Like, it's like, it matches the scenes so perfectly. Like, it's music that enhances the mood that the scenes are going for, which is what music should do. it's really, like, just the whole thing, like, the movie was really good up to that last scene. That last scene, and I guess it makes sense that my sister would use the word whole. That last scene closes off the film and makes it this sort of masterpiece, really. Because with that last scene, this film is held above, like, it goes to a whole different level. Like, that last scene, it just sets it on this whole different level. And even after that, it's good. I mean, I like the way that right after that, you don't get a scene where, like, Norman's a hero or anything. If anything, everyone's kind of ignoring him. Like, you get scenes of the people saying, like, oh, well, you know what, it's when there's an angry mob, you sort of get pushed into joining it. I was sort of pushed into joining it. Like, I was doing it because everyone else was doing it. Like, people talking to each other, sort of, like, justifying, like, basically calling for blood. And you get, like, Alvin, like, trying to score with girls, and the scene with Norman's sister asking Neil's older brother to a movie, which, another thing you don't see in kids' movies, his response, oh yeah, sure, you'll love my boyfriend, he's a total chick flick magnet. I think my sister was more, pleased with that than anything. Well, that's not true, she was pleased with the film, but that was one scene she was stuck on. She was sort of like, I cannot believe that they took that risk, like, in a good way. It's sort of like I'm still kind of surprised. What with that and just the child thing, that this movie has not been, and I guess in that way it's good that it's not an exceptionally popular film. If this was a more popular film, so many people would be complaining about it. But he's basically, it's a happy ending in the sort of more subtle way, like, directly after a scene that's both happy and sad at the same time. Sort of heartbreaking and very sad and very grown up. Like, this movie, by the time you reach the end, it's very grown up. Great morals, like, that's great message, I should say, maybe not great morals. Like, the message in general, it's handled so well. It really is. It's not just like it's not good to bully people, because the speech that Norman gives Aggie, that at one point she asks, well, don't you ever want to make the people who hurt you, make them pay for what they've done? And he says something like, yeah, but what good would that do? You get so hung up on the bad people, you forget that there are good people too. It's just handled really well. And a film like this, if you're going for something like an anti-bullying message, going from it in a perspective that makes it so that there's no bad guys is important. When there's no bad guys in a film, because there really isn't a villain in this film, an outright villain, it makes it more accessible to people. Not to everyone, because a lot of people didn't like this message. Some people said that they felt like it was sort of forced into the plot, which, again, I don't agree with. But it's nice that there's no real villain, because it really makes it sort of looks at it from sort of the perspective of, they're just, like, from everyone, because, like, the zombies, you don't, despite the fact they put this child to death, but you don't end the movie, like, hating them. You feel bad for these guys, because when it's revealed, and Norman's first like, how could you? The one guy, the judge, who's sort of like the leader, says that they were scared and they did something terrible, And in life, they really thought that they were doing the right thing. In death, they're lost. Like, they were punished by not being able to go to rest for 300 years, and they're not proud of what they've done anymore. Like, they know it's not the right thing, and that their death has revealed that to them. So you end the film really not, there's just, that's how these kind of things, when you take on something serious like this, you don't villainize one person, because that makes the message more accessible to everyone. So yeah, I was just so impressed with this movie. Like, incredibly impressed with this movie. It really is. It's easily the best animated film I've seen so far this year. It's probably one of the best animated films I've seen. Like, I know a lot of people have been asking for my list of my favorite animated movies, which I intend to do, but the reason I've held off so long is because a lot of the films on my list I still have reviews to do. Doing a list and praising these movies ahead of time will in some cases, like if I put one of my favorite movies up against a movie that's not one of my favorites in a real versus real, it's going to be obvious which one I'll choose if I do the list first. But this movie's probably on the list. I mean, I'd have to like take some time to write it out and consider everything, but I think this is probably one of my favorite animated films in general right now. And it's not like, it's not number one. I mean, if I were to make a list of my favorite animated films, it'd probably have to go up to 20 to 25. I don't know where on the list it would be, but it's probably on there. Like, I loved this movie. It's the first, I was expecting a lot from this year. This is the first film that has really gone above and beyond my expectations. It's the first film that's come up to my expectations. Film that I've expected to like, and has come up to my expectations and then gone beyond them, and that's the best thing. Like, I love being wrong about films in that way. I love looking at a film and thinking, oh well, I'm sure it'll be competent and entertaining, and then have it be so much better. I love being wrong about that. I wish I was more wrong about the films. I wish I was more wrong in that way, rather than thinking, oh, this movie will be great, and then it just turns out being okay, or just turns out being good. Yeah, I love to be wrong about that. I hope the rest of the film, I hope I'm wrong about, I'm a fairly cynical person. I hope that the rest of the movies this year surprise me. I hope that ParaNorman is challenged by some of the films being released later this year. I really do. Yeah, that's all I have to say. I just wanted to talk about it more. Next Real vs. Real should be coming out either tomorrow or Thursday. I'll try for tomorrow. It would be tomorrow, but I do have plans, so we'll see. I'm probably going to be working on it all tonight after I'm done uploading everything. So, but definitely by Thursday. Thank you for listening to me rant. I'm the Animated Heroine. Have a good afternoon.